Hello everybody, welcome back to the Unversed podcast. Danny here. Today we're going to be talking about Mushishi. So Mushishi, I believe, is a monthly manga. It is over now. There was 50 chapters in total. And it involves the main character, Ginko, who is a Mushishi, a person who works with Mushi, this invisible creature that is a part of the world. And there's different variations of them doing different various things. And the purpose of the manga is it shows pretty much a different Mushi every chapter. Sometimes there are two-parters for chapters. And he just it's pretty much a Mushi of the month. It shows you these tales with the Mushis, but they are, in a sense, secondary to what the chapters are. The chapters are mini stories involving people involved with these said Mushi. And it's a very interesting manga. There's not like a real story to it, but there are chapters that do create a plot. And from that plot, you understand how the manga is structured. I think it does a pretty good job at doing that. It's essentially just Ginko, the main character. We eventually get a flashback of his life, of how he became this Mushishi, of who he is now. And from that flashback to other plots revolving around him, you understand, like, yes, this is how the manga has to be based on how this character is. And the manga literally it's just him wandering around because he cannot stay in one place for too long. He attracts Mushis wherever he goes, and if there's too many in one area, that causes problems for that village or wherever he may be. So he is essentially cursed to travel forever. And, excuse me. It's good. There's some really great stories here. Be it as they are one-shots, the mangaka does a great job of telling you this story with these characters that you just meet. And sometimes there are recurring characters, sure. But yeah, when you're introduced to new characters, which is pretty much almost the whole manga, the mangaka does a great job of making you feel these characters. You understand who these characters are within like a few pages of reading it. And that's kind of rare from what you can get here and there, like a previous slice of life manga that I read, Yozakura Quartet, that involves a very week by week situation. But however, with those slice of life mangas, it's always in the same area. And here he's literally traveling. Essentially, it's all in Japan, but it might as well be the world as far as we know, right? But this is also in a time, this is like very feudal Japan era, like hundreds of years ago. Like this is like Samurai Champloo-ish era, if you may. So it does have its limitations to why he's only in Japan. So character himself, Ginko, he's an interesting character. He is, as far as you can tell, just a basic generic character. Like it doesn't feel like there's anything special about him, right? But that's the thing. It's like these stories aren't about Ginko, right? They're about the places that he travels, where he interacts with these people who are involved with Mushi or have been afflicted by them, right? So I think that they do a good job with that by one, having a very generic looking character, and also having him not be that interesting of a person, but wherever he goes, there's always something interesting happening. Like he's always fixated on finding rare, unusual things that involve Mushi, because that is how he makes his living. And of course, when you add that with his background, you create this world where you don't care what Ginko's going to do next. You care about where he's going to go next to see the next story. And I think that's really good for this manga. Like, I don't really see how you can change anything with that structure for Mushishi and it'll be better. I think this is the best it can be. And that's saying some good stuff. Now, I know there is an anime I believe it had 2 seasons. Haven't seen it, but might just give it a check just to listen to the voice acting and seeing the visuals and how they animate this, because man, the art can be pretty good. Like when he draws characters, they can be all right. But when he draws like the environments and the mushi, like that's some really interesting stuff. And I think like, you know, when you read mangas, like especially in tankobons, they don't always color the colored pages from the magazine, so they'll be black and white. And here, from what I can tell, his color pages from the magazine he published in, I'm assuming it's a he for the manga. Let me double check. It was watercolor that he used. So I think like some of the volume covers shows like the color, like colored pages, but not like the watercolor. So that is also a good aspect to this. Here we go. Mushishi mangaka. Let's see who it is here. But yeah, sadly only 50 chapters, you know. And you know, just reading the last chapter, it's interesting, because I was like, man, like we're actually at the last chapter, and once you read it, it doesn't feel like a finality, you know. But that's, again, I mean, there is a finality in the chapter. I believe it's a 2-chapter arc, and it's a she actually for the manga, a Yuki Urushibara. She did a great job with Mushishi. I believe she also drew it, published by Kodansha. And according to Grant, the volumes are pretty hard to find. Like there wasn't that many publicized in English, I believe. Yeah, because I'm here on Amazon looking at the Mushishi volumes, and prices can vary, I will admit. But yeah, again, there is no true finality to Mushishi. However, that's not how this manga is structured. I don't think there should be a finality. If there was, it'd feel kind of weird. Like the only way like it would give you the feeling of a finality is if Ginkgo himself like retires or something happens to him, that's what was kind of hinting at the last chapter, was something was going to happen to Ginkgo, and that would be the end of this series. But yeah, again, him just traveling, and the main premise is him going to see these strange areas where people are involved with Mushi. Like when the manga ended, like you assume like that's just what's going to keep happening. He's just going to keep finding more and more rare occurrences with Mushi. So I'm glad the ending kind of had that. I mean, it felt unexpected. Like reading the last chapter, you're not thinking like, oh wow, I can't believe it's over. You're thinking, what? That was the last chapter. You know, it not in a bad way essentially, but it's like, oh man, like I would love to read more. Especially because, man, some of these stories, like it's crazy. Like I don't know what the exact ratio is for it, but there's a lot of stories that have happy endings, and then there's a lot of stories that have sad endings, and then there's some stories that meet in the middle where it is a sad way to end this story, but the people involved in the story have come to the acceptance of it in a sense that they will find happiness out of this somehow. So there's a nice balance to having all that set up, and then while you're having flashbacks trying to get us more engaged into Ginkgo, like it's balanced pretty well. Really don't know what more to say about Mushishi other than just go read it. It's definitely worth the read. And because, you know, it's like the environments are just interesting. Like all the scenarios are interesting. Like there's so many different variations of Mushi that you could literally tell any story and just have some new Mushi involved with it. And there's actually some chapters that don't involve Mushi. Like there's this concept, like there are Mushishi, like you see more Mushishi. There's these instances where Ginkgo bumps into an area, right? Like there was a mountain that was enclosed off, and once you get in there, you're essentially trapped. Like even though it's winter on that mountain, everywhere else it's spring. And it's like, why is that? And he goes and he meets the master of the mountain, right? Where it's pretty much the guardian of that area. He's responsible, he or she's responsible for that entire area, making sure nature stays how it is. And it takes the form of any animal, like it enters in an animal's body when it's born, or something like that, right? And it grows up into the master and it takes on the role. And like the first instance we got that was with the turtle. And I wasn't expecting to see like a master itself, like this was the introduction to us finding out about these things and, seeing it happen, like unfold, like it's pretty good stuff. And then the last chapter that it involves a master, but it's a special kind of master. It's different. Something that you wouldn't expect essentially. But yeah, that's great stories. Again, like single chapters that really bring you into that world, and it's only for a moment. Much like how Ginkgo's life is, right? It's parallel to that. Where like, well, of course we can't stay too long in these stories because Ginkgo himself cannot stay in these stories. He has to move on eventually before any large amount of Mushi enter that area. So that's how it's really well structured, right? Like, it's pretty clever when you think of it, like pretty deep like that. It's like the only reason why it's like this is because the character, and because the character can't stay long, we the audience cannot stay long. So that's some pretty good stuff, man. I like it. And man, some characters are just really good. Like, even if you only meet them once, like, again, this manga, she does a really good job at creating characters that you can relate to and like get into their lives within only like a couple of pages. And sure, each chapter is 50 pages, but like, well, wow, like when you read these, you're like, it could be its own thing in a sense, right? So really fantastic stuff here. I don't really know what else to say about Mushishi. I mean, just go read it. It's a good time. There's some moments, man. Like it's almost like it's a subtle roller coaster of emotions, you could say, because again, like that balance of the stories where you have good stories, you have sad stories, and you have stories that meet in the middle. When you go through all of those, you're just like, oh wow, like eventually, like I read some chapters, I was like, oh man, like that just happened, huh? Oh, I wasn't expecting it to end like that because I thought it was just going to be a good ending, right? Because Ginkgo usually saves the day, but then the manga reminds you that, well, when Mushi are involved, it could be up and down, It's not always a 50-50 chance of this, So, again, just crazy stuff. Definitely, again, just read it, give it a shot. Because basically, like, the first few chapters is just the whole manga essentially. So if you're not feeling it, then it's not for you. But if you love the first chapter, you're gonna love this series. Again, like I really had a good time reading it, and I'll probably check out the anime, bring it up on the podcast on the main episodes, and yeah. Until then, while you're reading it, and if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can always email us at unversedpodcast@gmail.com for any question, comments, concerns, like I just said. And you can follow us on social media at Unversed Podcast anywhere you go to stay updated. And as always, we will talk to you next time.
찬 차라라라라 찬 차라라라라라라라라라라라라라라라 찬ジャックが仲間になった。